Hi, my name is Fred Wheeler and I love movies. And today I want to talk about War of the Worlds 1953, the original War of the Worlds movie. It took a long time to get to this point, and the story's been around since, well, 1800s, not 1900s, I think it's 1900s. It's been around a long time. Set in the Victorian age originally in the novel. So this is I want to go over sort of what's going on behind the camera, talk about the actors, talk about the plot, sort of pull it apart. And I don't really want to beat on this movie because I really enjoy this movie a lot. And I find that even when I rewatch it, I still find something good about it, even when I've seen it many times. This is the alien invasion story that has been retold many times, and the War of the Worlds novel is really the inspiration for pretty much every single alien story put to film. Like if there's an alien involved on film, War of the Worlds has probably had something to do with it in terms of its inspiration and the ideas behind it. As I said, I continue to love watching this 1950s movie. Every few years, I'll either watch it once a year, or I'll watch it after 2 or 3 years have passed, and then I'll watch it again. And I am not getting bored by it. I still enjoy it. War of the Worlds 1953 had a budget of $2 million, most of which was spent on special effects. Okay, which is astonishing for a genre. Not that it's not considered A-list film material. Science fiction, monsters, horror, none of that is considered A-list film material, not back in 1950s. The North American profit for this film is $2 million. That's domestic, North America. Which really meant that this film was potentially a financial flop. But it's a bit hard to figure out because with a budget of $2 million, you would need to make about $6 million globally to be able to make your money back, or maybe $5.5 million back. And of course, unfortunately, the data around how much money this movie made isn't really held anymore. The global distribution of the film was not well documented, so the financial worldwide profit is actually unknown. So it's not actually easy to know whether it was financially successful or whether it was financially a flop and lost money. But what we do know is that War of the Worlds 1953 has become a cult classic in science fiction. It is considered one of the greatest pieces of work ever done for a variety of different reasons. And the film rights for this was held by Paramount Pictures since 1925. It took them at least 26 years to get to a point where they started getting around to making a movie of War of the Worlds, because production didn't start till 1951 and the film wasn't released till 1953. So the director was Byron Haskin. Byron Haskin, born in 1899, and died in 1984. He was an accomplished special effects artist, also a cinematographer, and he had turned director. So he had a really good understanding of special effects, using the camera, capturing that information, and then of course he went on to directing, which is probably a natural sort of flow for any kind of development, if you weren't going to just stay in special effects or working behind the camera as the cameraman or camera person. Byron won a special Oscar in 1938 for innovations in projection. So he was top of his game. Haskin was chosen because of his visual technical expertise, considered ideal to match the sort of special effects required for a heavily laden special effects production like War of the Worlds. Because if you're going to make this story, you have to expect there's going to be a lot of special effects, and there was. Haskin has reportedly considered the two lead actors, which we'll talk about, the actor and the actress, as terribly wooden. He was dissatisfied. He wasn't happy with their performance. He considered them sort of subpar, but he didn't want to pay for a high-end actor because I think ultimately I don't think he was the one who picked them. I think it was actually the producer, George, who selected them to play those parts rather than Byron. Byron probably didn't get that to make that choice, unfortunately, and so he never got the performance from them that he really wanted. These things happen. The editor, Everett Douglas, he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Editing for his work on this film in 1954 at the Oscars. This film, I think it won between 4 or 5 different Oscars for its portrayal. Like it got a lot of awards. One special effects, I believe. One was in editing, and there were a few others as well. The producer, George Pell, is really important to this whole story, but there's another individual who's really important, and that is the executive producer, Cecil DeMille. So the Hungarian George Pell was previously responsible for producing Destination Moon, which was a 1950s movie, and also When Worlds Collide, 1951. So they were considered pretty important in terms of the science fiction genre, in terms of filmmaking at that particular time. So he was really good at that stuff. So he was a good choice. George was chosen by Cecil DeMille to helm this adaptation of War of the Worlds, and DeMille is supposedly said to have granted Pell complete creative control publicly, but I don't think that really was the case, because what you do find is there are some decisions that are made about this film later on that sort of suggests that there is still some sort of interference and that George Pell didn't have complete control, even though DeMille is saying he does. But he certainly had a lot of control. But I also think that George Pell had a lot to say about this movie over the director. So this is a script that George Pell got very angry with. At Paramount, didn't necessarily view this as anything but rubbish, and it was initially the script was tossed into a rubbish bin, which led to a lot of problems. But it all got resolved because, fortunately, the Paramount owners one of them stepped in, and he got his film, and he got his budget, and he got everything he wanted to make the film. So that's a good thing, right? things do work out sometimes. So the early filming was actually produced 2 days into the production, and the reason is that Paramount realised they only had the silent rights to the H.G. Wells novel. That means they could only make the movie if it didn't have sound. That's right, nobody could speak. It would all have to be just text. So very quickly the rights issues were resolved by the estate, and they went back into production. But highly amusing to consider that Paramount hasn't actually made sure they had the right rights. The problem was that had the rights for 26 years. And so, of course, they never got round to making sure that they updated them from silent films to talking films. I tell you, people. Okay, the music by Leith Stevens. Now, Stevens is responsible for the score, and there's a thing about this movie, and that is its music and its score. Because Stevens delivers a film with an ominous orchestra with a tone that's terrifying and otherworldly. It was unlike anything we'd really heard before. It was hardcore. I mean, a lot of science fiction movies tended to have that terrifying horror aspect to them, and they're a little bit off. Alien and otherworldly was a thing you could do, particularly for horror, and they did it in this, and it works really well. It still works now. It lifts the whole movie completely. The screenplay is by Bar London. So London was more inspired by the 1938 Orson Welles radio broadcast from the original H.G. Wells novel. So he didn't base quite as much off H.G. Wells' novel as he looked at what Orson Welles had done with that rather legendary radio broadcast. So that's why you'll notice that the movie isn't directly the same, and there's some changes and differences compared to the film, compared to the novel. Also, too, the story relocates H.G. Wells' 1898 novel from Victorian England to the 1950s Los Angeles and its surrounding areas. So Pell wanted to modernize the setting for post-war America, and he added that sort of small town, charming vibe before the disaster. That was kind of it needed to capture the primary audience, which was going to be the American audience. So it had to be sort of centered there, and it's in all respects, it's an American movie. So that's one of the reasons why that was done. There's some other things that are a little bit strange about this, not just changing the setting and the sort of the year that it takes place, but you'll notice that Dr. Clayton Forrester and Sylvia Van Burn have an odd relationship. They were originally written to be a married couple, much more in line with the original novel, but later executives insisted on a beginning romantic relationship between the two, which is why these two individuals feel like they were always together, or at least they are very much forced together in the story. This is why the two lead actors are, in fact, forced together very quickly in the story. The story centers around them and their experiences, and it also explains why Forrester, who's only just met Sylvia, will not leave without Sylvia and is running through a city looking for her. They were meant to be happily married. Executives sometimes. So there are remnants of what was initially in the script that have obviously been changed, that didn't get completely ripped out. And so that's why it seems a little bit odd, their relationship. Now, we have to talk about special effects because it's War of the Worlds. And the art direction. So Albert Norzaki was Paramount's art director at the time. He designed the Martian war machines with that really sinister manta ray shape, topped by a cobra head neck. And why? Well, this absolutely avoided the cliche flying saucer image, which was very common back then in the 1950s. So it was a different shape to that, but it also, it was impossible to duplicate the tripod from the original novel. You just couldn't have done it. It would have been 10 times more expensive. 10 times more expensive. That was well beyond the capacity of anybody making a film at that time. So they could not do tripods, not in 1950. Okay. There were 3 copper models that were built. They were very heavy. They were full of electronics. And they used the same blueprints from those models. Later, they were reused for Robinson Crusoe on Mars in 1960, which is kind of amusing, but things get reused in films, particularly back then. The Martian suit, and we don't see the Martian for very long in War of the Worlds, was too large for the confined set originally. So it was rebuilt in one night and it was falling apart because it was still wet. It hadn't dried. But one of the great things about that is it looks really realistic and organic compared to the original Martian suit that they had, because it is still drying and not set and it's not cured, but it was also falling apart. It only just managed to get the footage that they needed done. This is why you see the Martian for so little time, because they couldn't have done anything else. The Martian suit was literally just hanging together by tape. The effects team, led by Gordon Jennings, won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects in 1954, which was actually a new category of award at that time. In fact, that category of award for the Academy Awards was created because of this movie. There was no competition at the time. It was the first time somebody had ever done anything like this at this level and this scale. So they decided to make a new award, and War of the Worlds won it. No competition too. But, even if there had been competition, I don't think they would not have won it, because it is such a great film and the special effects are really impressive. The death ray sound effects were created by mixing a reversed electronic guitar plus adding reverb, and then that green skeleton beam sound was made by hammering on high tensile or high tension cables. A common thing to do, particularly for Star Wars sound effects. They do that sort of thing as well. And both of those sound effects that you hear in the movie War of the Worlds were used or reused later on for shows like The Outer Limits, the original one, and Star Trek, believe it or not. The disintegration effect, where you see some humans getting, basically disintegrated down to dust, that effect required 144 separate matte paintings. And the force fields that protect the Martian machines, they were actually glass domes that were composited optically, because they couldn't have done it any other way. So they just had to find something that, those domes are the sorts of things you put over the top of something, right, to protect food and stop it from spoiling. It's essentially what it is. The special effects in the 1953 movie are impressive to this day. Like there are times where you look at this and you think, okay, this is an old movie, older special effects, but I still think that a lot of it stands up pretty well, even to this day in 2025. Particularly the alien ships themselves. Maybe not necessarily their green energy rays and the red ray, maybe not those effects quite so much, but the actual ships and them moving around are fabulous and very convincing. The film's iconic explosion of the Los Angeles City Hall, that was actually an 8-foot miniature built inside and then blown up while filming at high speed, because that's what you do. If you need to blow up small stuff, you have to run a camera at high speed, otherwise it doesn't look right. Many military extras, so real people from the military, were actually National Guard troops. So if you see military figures and so forth in this film, particularly in the background, and they don't have a speaking part, they're probably National Guard troops, and they were performing real drills to give it the the feeling of a realistic battle. And they were doing these drills near Phoenix and LA. They actually drove out there while they were on maneuvers and just had the actors running back and forth past tanks and so forth and taking shots there, because they couldn't afford to go and buy tanks and have them run around, so they just ran around in front of the National Guard who were doing their training drills. That's how they got that footage. And a lot of this happens, that we keep getting more of this too. Like if you see, there's a lot of military hardware and equipment. That's real military hardware and equipment. It's not stage stuff. It's not built. It's actually authentic, the real thing. And and that is because they were basically filming their film around the activities of the National Guard. Battle scenes used miniatures combined with live action footage, which was considered groundbreaking back in 1953. It's why a lot of those scenes look really convincing. It's because it is actually true footage. They also used stock footage. There's a lot of stock footage used that was blended with visual effects to depict a lot of the devastation and destruction, and this was to be cost effective, And so what they did is they took a lot of the footage of things burning and collapsing and structures falling apart. They took that from the 1944 eruption that took place. And so what you're seeing is a combination of miniatures but real destruction that was recorded for news bulletins and, as TV. So that's why it looks so convincing. There was a degradation of the original 3-strip Technicolor prints. So what can happen with film over time if it's not well protected is it'll break down, and as it breaks down, you'll notice more and more stuff. A lot of things that might have been hidden before become visible. And so what happened is, over the decades, the wires you couldn't see in the original release. But as the film got older and older, because it's 3-strip Technicolor prints, particular type, the end result is you started to see the Martian ships held up by the wires. They became visible. Not all the time, but quite a lot of the time. So later on, a 4K restoration back in 2018 removed all of the cables and lines that were showing up and restored the true or the original intent and look of the film, which is great news. So special effects, big deal for this film, really, really are. I have always enjoyed them, but that is not the only thing I've enjoyed about it. The cinematographer was George Barnes. He was a veteran cinematographer. He shot the movie in Technicolor, which is an extremely complicated process. It's a huge camera, and really noisy. It's amazing that they even managed to get the sound sorted out with a camera like that running on set. And this was unfortunately George's final feature film that he made. Now, there are a bunch of actors we need to talk about who played specific parts. So I'm going to go through the lead actors first and then go into some of the supporting actors. So Gene Barry starred as Dr. Clayton Forrester. And Gene Barry was primarily a stage and TV actor before this film. Gave him his sort of first major lead role in cinema. He later admitted that his role required him to look authoritative as a scientist, even though he had no real scientific background and knew nothing about it. He had to rely heavily on the script notes and the guidance from George Powell. Barry was also best known for being the TV star in the 1960s shows like Bat Madison and Burke's Law. He also reprised his role as Dr. Forrester in the 2005 Spielberg adaptation where he made War of the Worlds again, and he plays a scene in the hospital. So that's him. Come back. His character, or the character name itself, also inspired the mad scientist that is called Dr. Clayton Forrester in that old cult TV show Mystery Science Theater 3000. Gene was not the best actor in this movie. He's passable, or wooden in some respects, but that's all right. I can live with that. That's fine. Next we have Anne Robinson, who played Sylvia Van Buren. Now Anne disliked the wig so much that she was given to wear in this, and she used to claim that no one recognised her without wearing that wig. And one of the reasons for this is Anne Robinson was a contract player. So what is a contract player for Paramount? Basically, she did stunt work. She was a stunt woman. She was also a supporting role person. So she would come in and play, background parts, fill in, extras. But she would also come in and read for parts as well. They might be major roles, they might be minor roles, but being a paid contracted player for Paramount meant that you would also help the main actors practice their lines by saying whatever lines in the scene that needed to be said, and then of course the main actor would then come back. So she was there to help support them quite often. And she got this breakout part. This was her first one. She was quite shocked. She really didn't think she was going to get the part, and she did. She also performed her own stunts in one of the scenes where she has to run through the church doors as the Martian attacks. So yeah, very capable woman, would you believe it? My favourite thing about Anne Robinson is she's very attractive. But the thing that stands out with Anne is that even when she's standing in a scene with other people who are speaking the main dialogue for that scene, she does little things or stuff. She uses body gestures. She uses facial expressions that I found highly amusing. Convinced me that she was probably the better actor out of everybody else in the scene, and quietly steals the scene away from whoever's doing their thing. If you pay attention, you'll notice it. It reminds me of Steve McQueen in The Magnificent Seven, where he's constantly, playing around with his hat, messing around with his collar. He's doing lots of little things that are drawing the attention away from Yul Brynner. And Anne was doing that exact same thing in this movie, which is hilarious. I think it's a good sign that she's a capable person. But this is probably her most famous role too. She didn't really get to do very much else other than this. What she did get to do, though, is she reprised Sylvia Van Burn in 1988 and in 1990 in a TV series called War of the Worlds, believe it or not. So she actually played the character she had played in the past. Again, she also continued her character arc decades later, which is quite surprising. She also cameoed, just like Jean had. She cameoed in the Spielberg 2005 remake of War of the Worlds as with Jean Barry. I believe she plays the mother or grandmother to Tom Cruise's kids as they take, they finally make their way to where the mum is, right, with the kids. And she's the grandmother standing there in the door. She often joked about being the first woman in colour to fight Martians. I don't know that she was fighting Martians. She was given some terrible lines. This movie is full of the cliche woman screams for no particular reason, and is obviously clearly got no courage and needs a man to support her. It's all very 1950s for sure. Then we have Les Tremayne. He portrayed General Mayne. Now, Tremayne was a prolific radio star, probably one of the most recognised voices in the 1940s, who he transitioned to film and TV, even though he did a lot of radio. He played the commanding general, a figure of authority during the military response against the aliens. Tremayne could perform, believe it or not, 65 different voices, which kept him in demand for radio dramas during the golden age of radio. Really quite impressive. One of the great things about Tremayne and his portrayal of General General Mann, is he's not portrayed as being a psycho, a warmonger, or stupid. He's actually played as being legitimately a sensible individual who knows what they're doing in a military situation, which I found very refreshing. It's very frustrating when movies or stories do something like they make a character seem more stupid than they really should be. You know what I mean? We have Lewis Martin, who is the pastor Dr. Matthew Collins. And now Martin often portrayed religious or fatherly roles back in the 1950s films. His dramatic attempt to make peace with the Martians by reciting the 23rd Psalms is one of the most memorable scenes in the movie. It's also probably one of the most ridiculous things you could possibly imagine a character doing in the story. So a lot of people sort of don't like the scene because it certainly results in a quick death for him. It is not unexpected. We are all expecting the alien heat ray to vaporize him. We just don't get to see that. But he does. He dies. The scene required Martin to walk steadily towards a practical effect involving a high heat light and pyrotechnics, which was actually quite risky and dangerous while filming. So, some real danger involved in trying to do that. Even though that is his best scene, considered his best scene, but also his worst scene in the film, I think that there's a great thing about this character is he is, again, he starts off not really coming across as being an idiot. It doesn't portray a priest or religion by looking down on them in any way. It's all pretty well above board. There's no sort of ulterior motives. There's nothing to sort of read into it, which is great. We have Robert Cornthwaite. He played Dr. Pryor. So Dr. Pryor was your typecast scientific role, basically. He appeared in a lot of that sort of stuff after this movie. Robert wound up playing the same sort of thing, a doctor, a scientist, and The Thing from Another World in 1951. He'd done that role. He disliked science fiction films and stories, but he unfortunately became iconic for that genre because he could be calm. He came across as being intellectual. He had that screen persona of being the scientist. So he wound up playing a lot of those roles. We have Paul Frees, who is the radio announcer, or he did a lot of voice roles. He's uncredited in the movie, by the way. Paul Frees was one of the most famous voice actors in history. Disney's Haunted Mansion. He played Boris in Rocky and Bullwinkle. He provided radio announcements during the alien attack during the movie and during that sequence. And he had many sort of minor voice roles as well, which you may or may not be able to pick up on because he's that good. His booming voice gave realism to the scenes depicting social panic, which you don't often see in 1950s. They don't really do that with American movies, but they did here. So he did a lot of that. There is Sir Cedric Hardwicke, who is the narrator. We come across his depiction early on. We never see him. He is just the narrator, just the voice. But he has a gravitas with his narration. He frames the Martian invasion in biblical terms, something that George Pell insisted on doing, who was the producer, to give it sort of a more a moral tone. And his narration is widely regarded as one of the film's most iconic elements because we get all of the exposition dump from him. And it's not an unpleasant exposition dump. It is like we go on a journey through the solar system explaining what's happening to Mars and the Martians, which, of course, nobody on Earth knows about, and then explaining their plight. Is like they couldn't go anywhere else. Earth had to be it. So one of my favourite things to watch. And of course he does all of this with just little planetoids being shown. Charles Gemora. Now, Charles Gemora is the Martian creature. You wouldn't know this because you never see him. Charles was a veteran gorilla suit actor, so he would dress up as aliens, monsters, robots, things like that. He did a lot of special effects. He was a special effects artist. He's the one who portrayed the Martian we see in the farmhouse scene. Well, at least part of it. So while kneeling in the Martian suit, there was actually a platform that shifts unexpectedly, it moved maybe a bit too fast and a bit too far, and it nearly caused him to fall over. And if you look in the film, you might notice briefly there's a wobble that's visible in the final cut. When all of it happens so quickly that maybe you'll never notice. The Martian's three-fingered hand was designed based on a sketch by Albert Norzaki. And that three-fingered thing was a product of the tripods, because the tripods had three sort of legs, and so the assumption was, well, Martians should have three of everything. Tripod legs we can't do, but we can do three fingers, we can do three parts to the eye, we can do three of this, three of that, and that's essentially what they wound up doing. I mean, if you look at the movie, you can still see sort of three sort of magnetic, invisible legs that support the manta ray style war machines. There's a young Caroline Jones, which you may or may not be aware of, who had a bit part role in the film. It's really easy to miss, very quick. I think it involves a ball. I can't remember exactly. I think that's the scene that we're talking about. So before Caroline became Monica Adams in the Addams Family in 1964 to 1966, she played this role. And this sort of shows that even early on, her earliest film appearances, she was really persistent before she became famous. And you see her here. Many of the extras in the film were actually National Guard troops, as I mentioned. And yeah, they used authentic military equipment. They used, training routines and so forth. All of that stuff was very much, all the big battle scenes, they were all done near Los Angeles. The atomic bomb drop, a lot of this stuff is sort of utilizing them. Now, when it comes to the plot, this is a very simple story. There really aren't that many holes or problems in the story itself because it leans so heavily on the original novel and the radio broadcast. But what you do find is that this story takes place over the span of about 6 days. Not months or weeks or anything like that. It's not a long period of time. It's very, very, very short. The world was created in 6 days and it is going to be destroyed in 6 days by the Martians. The film opens with that grave narration from Hardwick explaining why the Martians are seeking Earth, their own planet becoming inhospitable and not really something they could survive on anymore. They had to go somewhere else. The biblical and scientific tone that George Pell emphasized, that was his decision. He wanted to moralize the invasion in some way, portray it as part of a divine plan where humanity is actually going to survive because of God's design, rather than leaning on the idea that the only reason the humans, humanity survives is because the human cellular strength that's developed over time by natural selection is what actually protects them from being wiped out, rather than their own actions. That it was beyond the capacity of humans to do this. This was deliberately done because back then that's probably one of the only ways you could put it forward and people accept it. You got to also remember a good chunk of America, North America, were very Christian, religious, and so that sort of helps sell your movie. The narration references to resources and planetary exhaustion. That these themes and ideas are echoed back in the 1950s, where there was a fear of overpopulation and scarcity, which was really not, you got to remember they're coming out of the Depression. 1950s, they're starting to come out of the Depression, and so, the idea of there being scarce resources was something that people could still understand, even though, the reality of that is probably not quite as true back then. While the impending invasion parallels, the anxiety of nuclear war as well. Like, there was a lot of, because the bomb had already been dropped, people knew about the atomic bomb, and so this is trying to sort of feed into that. Now, the meteor crash takes place near Linda Rosa, a small Californian town. The townsfolk actually celebrate it, want to turn it into a local attraction. It draws a lot of attention. It's sort of trying to depict America at that time as being very naive and willing to sort of turn anything into a money-making or attraction of some kind, which I thought was quite amusing too, and I still enjoy. Scenes of the crater were shot near Corona, California. They used colored gels and smoke machines to create that eerie glow from a meteor. A lot of that was generated from that. The townsfolk, or the townspeople, their casual curiosity, it was contrasted with the sharp reality of the horror that's following. And this was deliberately done, sort of to emphasize that humanity is vulnerable, they have a lot of vulnerability, and they're also quite stupid as a general population. I am amazed that they got away with this and that audiences didn't spot this, but that is what they've done. They've kind of put that in there. Locals attempt to greet the Martians with a white flag, but the Cobra heat ray obliterates the three guards that were making sure there was no fires going to break out. This is the one scene I think where a lot of people look at and say, why would you even consider this? If you're sitting there and suddenly something unscrews from a meteor and then there's something that comes out of it, would you not just run away rather than grab a white sack and try to make friends? But there's a reason for this scene. One, it is trying to portray that America was not looking, even though they might be naive and maybe a bit stupid, that they're not looking for a war. They're not looking for a fight. That is part of the reason for doing that in that scene. And that they would look for an alternative. But what the film is trying to do, and the story in the film, is it's using that moment to reject the idea of diplomacy as a solution. That there is no opportunity for diplomacy as a solution. It's now, I guess one of the things to understand is that is a product of its time, because Wells' critique of imperialism, which is what the War of the Worlds is, did look at diplomacy as a potential solution, and Wells believed in that sort of thing. Whereas in the 1950s, there was more of a fatalism about negotiation, where if you tried to negotiate with a hostile, more powerful individual or a hostile individual, it would just result in war anyway. This is echoing sort of the sentiment of the Cold War tensions at the time, and so that is depicted here in this film. But also too, the white flag burning instantly underlines the futility of peace with an unstoppable enemy. And essentially the Martians are unstoppable. There's not a thing that humanity can do, but they will try. The US military deploys tanks and aircraft against the invaders, and they are all incinerated by the Martian weaponry. And of course they've got force fields and they can't be damaged or hurt in any way. It's not a fair fight. Like about 90% or 95% of all of the equipment, tanks, planes, all destroyed. 65% of troops vaporized. It is not a good fight. It is very one way. This segment sort of is trying to critique that human reliance on technology and brute force isn't really necessarily going to work under under a particular circumstance, and that humanity does rely on brute strength and technology. It also anticipates that later on the atomic bomb scene will come up, because of course everybody, when they're watching the movie, are thinking, well, they can't use the bomb because that would affect everybody and the radiation, and it's a last resort, right? But if all the other technology doesn't work, you use the bomb and the bomb will work. Well, this is where things change, because it doesn't work. The scientists, Dr. Clayton Forrester and Sylvia Van Buren, they develop a bond, which really, do they develop a bond? I almost feel like they had that bond before they even met. But then again, and they do so, that their bond is supposed to have grown while they seek shelter during the invasion. They wind up in a farmhouse as it happens. George Pell insisted on the subplot to satisfy the studio's demand for a human connection. They really wanted they didn't want to look at the story in terms of a global sense. They wanted to go down small and micro. That's why we have Clayton and Sylvia and the story revolving around them so much. That it was part and parcel of George trying to satisfy Paramount's. I do believe that Byron Haskin really disliked the chemistry between the actors. He had mentioned that he felt that they were wooden in their performance, but he didn't really feel like they had any true chemistry. I don't know that I believe that, but anyway. Sylvia is depicted as an emotional, nurturing woman. The farmhouse scene reinforces this because she's cooking some eggs, while Forrester embodies that rational scientist or science, the typical trope of that era. Like that's the sort of character you would normally see. And then, of course, when Forrester and Sylvia hide in the farmhouse, which is hit by the alien Martian cylinder, and the Martian sends out a probe to explore, it is followed up by the appearance very quickly of the Martian. And the first thing we kind of see is the shadows, and then the hand on Sylvia's shoulder, and of course then a lot of screaming. There is only a clear glimpse of the Martian here, and I've already explained why, because essentially the Martian was only going to be able to last maybe one day, or part of the one day shoot, and then it'll be in pieces. But yes, and then of course it's scared off. It's just as scared of them as they are as scared of it. And the scene shifts from the global catastrophe to this intimate horror, like the horror of there's nothing we can do. We've tried everything we can. And it's creating more and more tension. It's contrasting the devastation and people's, claustrophobic terror, like the fact that you're closed in and there's nowhere to go. In the last desperate move, the US military drops the atomic bomb on the Martians, and it's completely ineffective. It does nothing at all. And that sort of reinforces, like, okay, we've tried everything. So the shift is, well, if the military can't do it, the scientists can maybe find a solution to beating the Martians, which of course is going to get lost. This is going to be wiped away as an option as well. There was a bold addition because the atomic bomb was only about 8 years in the public consciousness, but it was very much there. People knew about it. There was fear around it, but there's also a belief that if anything cropped up, it was the solution. It's showing that the atomic bomb failed sent a powerful message about human helplessness in the nuclear age. It also suggested that technology cannot guarantee safety. A reflection on fears about the escalating arm race too, like, just because we have the technology, there are other people who have that technology now, and they're going to be building it, and we can't really rely on anything. We're not safe. A lot of those things come into play. As the Martians advance on Los Angeles, social order disintegrates. People loot trucks. They actually carry off Forrester's scientific gear. Pacific Tech gets all of their stuff lost, and so at this ends any chance of humanity finding a way to fight back against the Martians using science. Because the scientists no longer have the blood, they don't have the equipment, and there's no time left. The looting scene was really quite controversial at the time because it portrayed American society breaking down, something that is really shown in 1950s cinema, not society as a whole. I guess this would probably be one of the first-ish times. It's not a common thing to see. It also highlights the sort of the fragility of civilization. It shows the fragile nature of keeping a civilization together, particularly when survival instinct takes over and people are just trying to get by. So Forrester finds Sylvia in a church as the Martian war machines close in. And we know at this point we're like, there's nothing they can do. Everybody's going to die. And then suddenly the Martians start crashing their war machines and they die. They're killed by Earth's bacteria. It's taken about 6 days for them to perish after breathing, Earth's oxygen. And, this is where we sort of see a solution and a good end, but a lot of chaos has taken place before that. So there's a happy ending to this story, but it's not the one that we were necessarily expecting, which is why the novel is such a great story as well. The film uses an actual church interior, and it enhanced it with a miniature for the collapsing debris outside. So there was a miniaturized version of it as well. The closing narration thanks God and his wisdom for creating germs. A stronger religious tone than Wells' novel would like to have had, because Wells was not very religious. He believed more in the evolution of and biological determinism. He believed more in science than he did in religion. But this aligns with the 1950s American values, so that's why they included such a strong focus on this. I think if anything, those lines mean very little. The reality is, whether you believe in God or not, what saved them ultimately was the fact that viruses and bacteria could hurt the Martians. Now, through the Martians' fall, through their biology, the film frames it as a divine providence, and this is why we get sort of a science fiction movie that looks as there is a moral reassurance that the world is moral in some way, and even though it might be just bacteria or viruses, they are to our advantage in some way. It's a strange way to frame things, but it's done that way. The Martians die. Their technology is powerless against microbes, apparently, which I find very weird. I think they would have. It's one of the flaws, I think, in a story like this, even going back to the novel. It's like, if you had the technology that the Martians had, you probably know how to deal with all bacteria and viruses at that point. But this story doesn't look at it that way. Humanity survives, not through their own strength or intelligence, but by chance, by a divine plan outside of their own plans. And this ending reinforces humanity in the face of nature, the themed core of Wells, but just amplified with a lot of religious stuff. And the final shots include a miniature city model where you can see destroyed Martian war machines, which becomes that iconic imagery of pretty much every science fiction film in history. Everybody's been trying to duplicate this concept and this image in everything they do. The narration actually bookends the action with the, I guess, pretentious tone. It is a bit pretentious. The final dramatic statement about humanity and how and why it was saved is that the littlest things which God in his wisdom put on this earth are the reason that humanity survives. It is I still like it, but I get what they're doing there. So, War of the Worlds, one of my favourite movies. Keep watching this over and over and again, and it never gets old for me. My summary, I guess, is, the fear of the unstoppable weapon, the failure of the atomic bomb, should that come, and it may well. They were all part of the Cold War anxiety portrayed at the time for this film. The movie shows humanity being fragile, where science and the military personnel, even in their best, doing their best, would be useless against a superior force. Like, science and the military are not portrayed as being incompetent. They're portrayed as being very competent, but that is just not enough. We've got faith versus science, where the alien invasion solution comes from the science of natural selection of all things, framed as divine intent by God. This is very much opposite to the original novel. The novel saw science and technology as the final arbitrator, rather than the naivety of religion. But I'm Christian myself. I'm all right with this idea. Despite humanity's devastation, the film still ends on reassuring the audience of the moral universe and the fact that humanity will continue. So for those of you who don't know, whether it's the novel or the radio broadcast that Orson Welles put together, or this movie, War of the Worlds, 1953, what this is about it's the story of colonization, where you have, normally invaders have better technology and they exterminate the natives that live there. And of course, right throughout human history, it's happened pretty much every single time. But ultimately, the risks of colonization are viruses and bacteria, which are always the ultimate winners. Whether it's one side or the other, the one that's technologically more advanced, and the natives are not, the only winner are the bacteria and the viruses. It's a masterpiece of film. I love this story, really do enjoy it, and I can't say enough about it. That's good. Like, you should go and watch it. If you haven't seen it, it's worth your time. And that's what I have to say about War of the Worlds, which is a lot, as it happens. I've said quite a bit. Maybe I've repeated myself a lot. I don't know. And it's been remade so many different times. I think this is still one of the better versions, in my opinion. But, love this movie. What will I talk about next? I don't know. I'm still working on The Man of Steel. I really want to talk about The Man of Steel, which is the story of Superman. It's actually the story of Moses, actually. But, certainly based off Moses. I don't know what it'll be. But, thanks for watching, and all the best, and enjoy your movie watching.